There are strange places in the cosmos, places so beshadowed, it is as if they form cracks of darkness within the endless night of space. These are the dark nebulae, one of the more challenging of astrophotography targets to shoot. This dark nebula is known as LDN 1337, and very close by, in the foreground here, is an open star cluster with accompanying nebulosity known as NGC 654. I think the presence of a star cluster in proximity to a dark nebula is fitting because while dark nebulae may seem ominous, like cracks in the blackness of space, the reality is dark nebulae are fecund territory. They are rich regions of hydrogen and various heavier elements, many of which are in the form of microparticles. Particles dense enough and absorbent enough to absorb and block starlight. And they are places where when something happens, something that might create a small ripple within the dark nebula, such as a nova of a nearby star, shockwaves sent through the nebula will lead to the process of new star formation, new stars, and new worlds, making dark nebulae, in fact, stellar nurseries. For astrophotographers, dark nebulae presents one of the most challenging targets. How on earth does one photograph darkness? And the answer is finding all the hidden light. And there is another challenge too, because dark nebulae are very dark DSOs. To film them well, you really need dark skies, because you're going to need to capture all the light that is there, so you'll have the best luck shooting them from a Bortle 1 or Bortle 2 area. You'll also want to use an OSC with UV IR cut filters or a mono camera with LRGB filters. LDN 1337 can be previewed with the Stellarium Planetarium. It is pretty near the more famous Heart and Soul Nebulae. It's a perfect dark nebula to shoot because there are a great deal of stars in the vicinity, providing much ambient light. We can also see the neighboring open star cluster, NGC 654. It bears the rather cute name of the Fuzzy Butterfly Cluster and shines like a gem against the blackness of the surrounding space. The first step in imaging this dark nebula will be to fire up Nina and get the observatory ready for imaging through the night. The startup sequence involves connecting Nina to the camera, rotator, filter wheel, focuser, mount, and guider. All those things go pretty fast except for the camera. It needs a few minutes to cool down to -5°C before we begin imaging. And while the camera is doing that, I also need to set Nina up with the coordinates to the dark nebula. Fortunately, Nina makes this easy. All I have to do is go to the Sky Map tab and type in the catalog designation of these structures, and Nina will open a star map based on those coordinates. Then I'll move the framing box over the target. The framing box has been pre-calibrated to reflect the field of view that will be portrayed by my telescope and camera combination. So I can know with almost perfect precision exactly where to place the framing box to get the best view of the dark nebula and its accompanying open star cluster. A remote camera and other telemetry devices monitor conditions at the observatory, including humidity, temperature, and the level of light. Once the observatory camera has to switch over to low-light imaging, I know it's time to begin the final phases of preparation. A quick autofocus is run and a plate solve done so that Nina can know where the telescope is focusing, and then the telescope is locked onto the coordinates of LDN 1337 and NGC 654 using the reliable Green Swamp server, which I replaced EQMod with recently, and it controls the Skywatcher EQ6R mount perfectly. LDN 1337 and NGC 654 are fairly small targets, so we'll be shooting with a moderately high focal length of 1240mm using a 203mm SCT telescope. Complete imaging will require 2 nights, about 16 dark hours, which will then be aggressively culled, and to capture as much light as possible, I'll be shooting in LRGB. Once the mount is pointing the telescope in the right direction, another autofocus is done because one region of the sky might not have quite the same focus as another region of the sky due to such factors as temperature differences, and then an imaging sequence is added, and one by one, 60-second subs are added to the memory. When dawn comes, sharp and crisp, it is time to walk out to the observatory and collect the SSD, containing the previous night's lights and the morning's flats. And then, the next part of the real work begins, developing. And here is where we really go to work finding the light hidden away in that dark nebula. All the images were stacked using the weighted batch preprocessor in PixInsight. I just find it does a really great job on any deep sky object. And once that's done, the LRGB masters are opened in PixInsight, and what I think of as pre-development will begin. Using the blur exterminator in correct mode only, I'll run it on each master separately, and that will correct any aberrations that may have appeared in the stars due to something like a minor mirror shift or perhaps an aberration in the mirror, though I haven't really found any aberrations in my telescope's optics. I seem to have gotten really lucky with this telescope and gotten a very good one. Then blur exterminator is reset to its default settings and it's run again on the LRGMB masters, and this will deconvolve the stars and sharpen up the non-stellar objects. The next step is to align the LRGMB masters. Using PixInsight's star alignment tool, I'll use the luminance as the reference channel and then drag the tabs for the RGMB channels into the box labeled target images. Then I'll get the original masters out the way so they aren't cluttering up the limited space of the desktop, then activate the tool. It's a very simple tool to use. And in moments, it will produce new RGMB masters that are aligned to the positions of the stars on the luminance channel. Once that's done, a statistical analysis is run on the RGMB channels to determine which one has the highest median. Then the color channel with the highest median will become the reference image for the linear fit tool. In this case, that'll be the blue master. Then the linear fit tool will be applied to the red and green masters to balance out the colors, so that the RGMB masters can be combined to make a color balanced image. You might be wondering why I'm using an older tool like linear fit as opposed to something much newer and flashier and whatever like the spectrophotometric color calibration. I've covered this in previous videos. I have found the spectrophotometric color calibration tool to really be unsatisfactory. It frequently produces washed out colors, especially those awful salmon pinks and pale blues. You can somewhat correct this by picking a different white reference, but then you have to run SPCC over and over again till you find the correct white reference. It's very time consuming. And in the end, I'm going to color balance the image anyway with tools like the channel mixer and curves and levels in the Affinity photo tool later on, so really what is the point of going through all the trouble to use the SPCC tool? So I find linear fit provides reliable, as in 100% of the time reliable good color balancing, so I use it. Why use something new just because it's new if it doesn't work as well? Once linear fit is done, I'll then use the channel combination tool to combine the red, green, and blue masters to get a final color image. It's easy to use the channel combination tool. For ordinary RGB, just leave it at the default settings and drag the channel tabs into the appropriate source image space within the tool. Then activate the tool. I'll name the new combined master RGB LF for RGB linear fit. And let's take a look at what it looks like. That's looking good. Now I need to prepare the RGB master by removing ideal stars and then creating an ideal development of the dark nebula. To do this, I'll simply duplicate the RGB master by clicking and dragging its name tag and then releasing the tab, and it will open a clone or duplicate of the original RGB LF image. I'll apply the default screen transfer function histogram stretch to the histogram tool by selecting the cloned image and then dragging the action icon, that little triangle on its side, over the action icon of the histogram tool, thus setting the histogram tool with the screen transfer function stretch, and then dragging that action icon over the image, which fixes another screen transfer function onto the image. The image will appear briefly white or overexposed because for just a moment the screen transfer function has been applied twice, once temporarily and once it's fixed to it. But hitting Ctrl F12 removes the temporary screen transfer function histogram stretch. So now it only has the histogram stretch that was applied directly to the image on it. Then I'm going to run the noise exterminator on the image. And all this is done mainly to provide good, noise-free, clean, colorful stars. Though later on I'll also make use of the non-stellar part of the image. The screen transfer function tends to run up the black point pretty high, and I can use that in later developing to create clean space and provide contrast with brighter nebulosity. But it's the clone image that will be the source of the star plate. Now I'm going to go ahead and run the noise exterminator to create stars that are as clear and clean as possible. You'll get the best results from the noise exterminator if you wait until after your histogram stretches are done, because the noise exterminator prefers nonlinear information. When everything's ready, I'll open the star exterminator and select large overlap, which takes a little bit more time for the star exterminator to do its job, but it does a better job reliably if you use the large overlap. I'll also make sure the star exterminator is using the most powerful form of its AI. The other two AIs are lighter and faster, but who cares? If I spend all night or multiple nights imaging a target, I'd rather spend a few extra minutes to make sure that the tools I'm using to develop it are doing the best job. And I'll select unscreened stars, which tells the star exterminator to remove stars from a nonlinear image. Finally, generate star image is also selected so that I get a star plate after the star exterminator is finished doing its job. After it's run, I get a nice clean star plate, and a second dark image with a high black point that reveals just the nebulosity within the image. I'll save those, then go back and remove the stars from the unstretched image. The star exterminator will do a better job removing the stars from the unstretched image because it prefers to remove stars from linear images. I will still make sure that the star exterminator, though, is operating with its best AI and that the large overlap is selected. But I will click off the Generate Star Image box because I don't need it here. I just want the unstretched, non-stellar image. When the stars are removed, the first thing I'm going to do is run a proper manual histogram stretch on the RGB image. About a year ago, I produced a video covering my manual stretch method called Perfect Histograms in 60 Seconds. The method I use has evolved a little bit since then, though it's still very much the same. I've just become a little bit more sophisticated in how I apply it. This image is not very complex though, as in there's not a lot of complex color and subtleness of transition of contrast in the image. So I don't have to become very sophisticated with working with this image. I'm just going to work with the RGB version of the stretch. And what I'll do is I'll set the leftmost triangle, which establishes the black point, a little way up whatever color forms the innermost parts of the light curve. In this case it's red. So I want the curve from that leftmost triangle to intercept the innermost part of the light curve, the red channel here, at a point halfway between the baseline and the first bar. And the middle channel I'm going to place right where the innermost color channel of the light curve, again also red, intercepts the first bar. I find that in most cases this gives me a reliably good black point, with sufficient histogram stretching to make a good image in further developing. Now I'll just apply the histogram stretch to the image, then run the noise exterminator on it because remember, the noise exterminator works best when the information is nonlinear. Then I'll save this plate as a lossless TIFF for further developing later, and then I'm going to process the luminance plate in the exact same way that you saw me do with the RGB plate. So I'll go ahead and skip over that part. Now, this is all just preparation for the good stuff, the advanced developing. That'll be done in Affinity Photo because, to be frank and honest, layer-based photo editors are much more powerful, efficient, and user-friendly. I can do things in a layer-based photo editor easily that would take quite some time and a great deal of effort in PixInsight. And in fact, I can do many things in a layer-based photo editor that I couldn't do at all in PixInsight. Alright, let's get to the layer-based photo editor and get to the good stuff and find all the light hidden in this wonderful image. Once Affinity Photo is open, the first thing I'm going to do is put the screen transfer function of the RGB master into the image. I'll just click and drag it in. Then I'll drag in the non-stellar version of the RGB master that I made using my own stretch strategy. I'll duplicate the STF version, just because that's standard procedure with layer-based photo editors. The lowest layer serves as something of a base and a proof copy. It's not strictly necessary to do this though. Partly I just do it out of habit. I've been doing layer-based photo editing for so long. And then with the snap tool activated, I'll quickly drag and align my version of the RGB master over the screen transfer function RGB master. Then I'm going to composite them together. Compositing applies an algorithm to a layer, causing the layer to blend its information with the layer below it. Affinity Photo offers almost 40 different composite algorithms, and picking the right one can clean up noise, clarify space, and bring out the contrast and detail within an image, almost like magic. An effect you can see here where I've chosen the color dodge composite method for the topmost layer, which emphasizes the color within the layer and also makes any luminosity stand out against the darkness. Bear in mind, compositing isn't really a noise removal technique, but choosing the right composite mode does have the ability to smooth out information, and this can make images look as if very powerful noise removal strategies have been applied to them. The next thing I'm going to do is drag the non-stellar luminance master over the image and snap it into place over the RGB layers. Then I'll select a composite mode to composite its information into the layers below. Usually, the luminosity composite mode is the best mode to apply to the L master, at least when you first bring it into the image. As you can see here, it has further cleaned up the space and lightened it a bit, as if an offset has been applied to the darkest space. And the luminosity composite mode has also added all the luminance information from the L master into the image, really bringing out the detail hidden away within the dark nebula. And suddenly we can see that dark nebula is not just a black fissure in space. There is brighter nebulosity, like fine white to gray cloud structure, all over every part of it. Now I'm going to right click on one of the layers, select Merge Visible, and this will create a new layer called Pixel with all the information of the visible layers combined within it. Before I do anything with that layer though, I'm just going to put all the previous layers into a group. It's easy, I'll just select them all, right click Group, and then name the group. I'll call it LRGB group and then make it invisible because we don't need to work with that information anymore. Now I'll open the frequency separation tool, select 100 pixel radius to maximize the frequency separation, and tear apart the pixel layer. The pixel layer vanishes to be replaced by high and low frequency layers. Low frequency contains all the color and luminance information, but on its own it's blurry. High frequency contains all the sharpness, contrast, and detail. On its own it is colorless and transparent, but place the high frequency layer over the low frequency layer, and the high frequency layer focuses the color and light information in the low frequency layer. Separating the layers allows their information to be enhanced and edited much more efficiently. One can, for example, push the color and brightness on the low frequency layer much harder without worrying about the high frequency information also being over-adjusted and devolving the image into grittiness. Now, it's time to pull the light out of the darkness. And one of the best ways always to begin with low frequency information is with the Levels tool in Affinity Photo. Here we can enhance the black and white levels of the RGB information discretely, which is kind of like stretching it, or we can operate on all the channels together. I find it's generally best to create one Levels tool and work discretely from the red to the green to the blue channel. Later, if necessary, we can open up another tool and work on the RGB information altogether. Adjusting the Levels tool like this really enhances the information within an image, giving it a very solid, full look. Generally, you want to bring up the black points of the red, green, and blue channels right to the edge of the light curve, but not clip the light curve. How much you bring up the white point, though, is more subjective. You want to bring it up as high as you can without overemphasizing any channel, so as to enrich your colors without leading to color clipping. The RGB on the Levels tool is looking pretty good, so I'm going to open another Levels tool and adjust the RGB master. This will just adjust all the RGB information together. Once again, we're going to bring the black points up. This time though, we don't really want to push the black points up all that high, not to the edge of the light curve, because the black points on the discrete channels have already been adjusted. If we push the black points any higher, we'll actually be clipping the black even though it doesn't show on the histogram. And we don't want that. We want contrast to be able to show through right over the dark nebula so that we can see all the interesting cloud structure that's all over it. We want to push the white point pretty hard though. That's going to enhance brightness within the image, which will tease out the subtle light of the clouds over the dark nebula. When that's done, I'll just open a curves tool, set it for the master channel, and then create a very slight inverse C-curve, lifting the darker areas of the image, while pulling the brighter areas back down so that they are not overly brightened. This will further tease out the light and enhance the sharpness within the dark nebula. And it will also go a long way to bringing out the surrounding gases hidden in darkness around both the dark nebula and NGC 654. When that's done, we're going to operate specifically on the high frequency information to enhance the sharpness. And there is a lot of invisible detail still hidden in this information. The high frequency information is weak, and I could enhance this in one of two ways. I could use more observatory time to point the telescope at it, but I don't feel that would be the best use of the observatory's time. The observatory is a limited resource. So instead, I'll enhance the high frequency information I already have, beginning with the Unsharp tool. The best way I know to use the Unsharp tool is drag the radius slider up till you begin to see the sharpness that you're looking for appear in the image. Then drag the factor slider up, which will enhance that sharpness radically around the image. Be very gentle with the factor slider though. It's easy to enhance too much. On the other hand, it's no big deal if you do. You can just lower either slider until you're back where you want to be. Now, I only want the Unsharp mask to affect the dark nebula, not the space surrounding the dark nebula. There's not a lot of information in that space, so really pushing the Unsharp mask will simply have that space devolve into grittiness. However, it's easy to keep this from happening. To apply the Unsharp mask only to the dark nebula, what I'll do is select the Unsharp mask, then go to the top to the layer drop-down menu, click on it, and a couple places down, I'll see the invert option. I'll select invert, and this will invert the Unsharp mask, meaning the entire Unsharp mask is masked out of the information. Then I can select the paintbrush, and with mask selected on the paintbrush, I can select the color white. And with the Unsharp mask tool selected, the paintbrush will paint out or erase out the invert mask from the Unsharp mask tool. Then with the paintbrush opacity and flow set for 100 and the hardness set to 0 so that the effect blends smoothly into the surroundings, I'll paint over the entire dark nebula so that the effect of the Unsharp mask is added only to the dark nebula. Now we're going to work with the Clarity tool. To get the best effect, place the Clarity tool layer over the Unsharp tool layer. This will lead to the Clarity tool building its enhancements upon what the Unsharp mask has already accomplished. Then move the slider slowly to the right, adding clarity slowly and bit by bit, enhancing the sharpness till you have it where you want it. The general rule of thumb that I go by is I enhance the sharpness until I see regions of the image that I am interested in begin to devolve into grittiness, and then I back down the clarity tool a couple of points until the grittiness is gone. 16% clarity is plenty. But, just like with the unsharp mask tool, I don't want this effect to be applied to the rest of the image. In the dark regions where there is little information, those regions of the image will devolve into grittiness. So as before, I'll just go up to the layer menu and invert the clarity layer, and then open the paintbrush tool, make sure it's set for white, which will erase the invert layer, and with opacity and flow set to 100 and hardness at 0 so that the effect blends in smoothly to the surroundings, I'll paint over the dark nebula, which paints the clarity effect into that region and that region only. Now I'll further enhance the sharpness over the dark nebula using the high pass filter. The unsharp mask, clarity tool, and high pass filters are very powerful in bringing out that hidden light because detail is the difference between light and shadow. Adding to the visible detail over the dark nebula literally teases up that cloud structure, making it brighter, more readily visible, as you can see happening in the image as it's developed here. When the high pass filter is open, the image immediately becomes blurry because the high pass filter has to be composited onto the image. With a normal earthbound image, you would use the linear light composite mode. But I find with astro images, the soft light composite mode works much better. Its effect is gentler and smoother. Then, using the slider bar, slowly drag up the radius until no more than 0.6. If you don't find the sharpness with the high pass filter that you're looking for there, duplicate the high pass filter and then slowly drag up the radius up as much as 1.2. Duplicate the high pass filter yet again and slowly drag the radius up to 1.8. Keep bringing it up no more than 0.6 per layer of high pass filter until you have it where you want it. I find that this seems to add the effect of the high pass filter more gently and constructively than you would get merely by cranking up the slider on a single high pass filter. And as before, this layer will be inverted and then its effect painted over just the region of the dark nebula. It's best to invert and paint first so the effect is added with the duplicates. Now we're at the point where we can bring in the stars. I'll just drag in the star plate that was prepared earlier in PixInsight. Once it's dragged into the image, I can just snap it quickly into place because the snap tool is turned on. That will align it perfectly. The next thing to do is duplicate the star plate because to make good stars, I always use 2 and sometimes 3 or 4 different star plates. The lower star plate I'll make invisible, I'll work with it later, and the upper layer I'll set for the screen composite mode. This will just add the light and color of that star plate to the image below. As you can see, the effect is kind of strong and I want to tone it down. With the screen star plate selected, I'll just open a curves tool and then drag an inverse C-curve over the histogram. This will not only dim the stars, but shrink them evenly, as if applying a quick and convenient deconvolve while dimming the stars. Then I'll make the second star plate visible and set its composite mode for color dodge. Color dodge emphasizes the addition of color and enhances the light within an image so that things appear to become more colorful and glow. When added subtly and artfully, it has a beautiful effect on stars, making stars within an astro image stop looking like just bright pixels stuck in the image and start looking like glowing stars that actually should be part of the image. But the effect of the color dodge composite mode is very strong. So I'll add a curves tool to the color dodge star layer as well, to dim and shrink the stars until they are adding just the quality and color of light to the stars that I already have through the screen method that I'm after. Now we're into the end game, and I'm going to apply some global edits to the entire image beneath the stars. I don't want to change or affect the stars at all. So what I'll do is I'll place the editing layers below the star layers so that they are only applied to the high and low frequency information below. Using the levels tool, I'll increase the global black point of the image just a little bit, just enough to darken the darkest regions, the space, which will enhance the brighter regions of the image. However, while that does improve the appearance of the space itself, it overdarkens the dark nebula. The dark nebula is already pretty black, so we can't have it darkened any further. We'll lose that detail that we're after. So, with that levels tool selected, I'll once again select the paintbrush, make sure it's black, and paint out the effect of the levels tool over the darkest regions of the nebula. Then I'm going to bring another tool that I think is underused and underappreciated into the image, the Gaussian blur tool. With the Gaussian blur under the stars so it doesn't affect them, but over everything else so it affects everything else that's been done, I'll slowly slide the Gaussian blur tool up until the gritty look of the darker space has been smoothed out. When the Gaussian tool is where I want it, I'll invert the tool, go up to the Layers menu and invert it, then select the Paintbrush tool and paint in the effect of the Gaussian blur over all the regions of dark space. Of course, omitting the dark nebula and the open star cluster with its associated brighter nebulosity. Now, there's just two things remaining. I'm going to open a Vibrance tool, and then I'll crank up the saturation just a little bit, which will apply a global color enhancement. Just a little. Just enough to give a little pop to the color that's already within this image. Now, the last thing I want to do is get rid of the overwhelming brightness of those swollen stars, the really bright stars. That is mainly the result of the color dodge composite. Color dodge is very powerful. It builds color on top of color and contrast on top of contrast with a very strong effect. So what I'm going to do is open up another curves tool in the color dodge stars. And using an inverse C-curve, I'm really going to draw down hard on the appearance of the color dodge stars, virtually eliminating them from the image. Then I'm going to invert the curves tool, removing its effect from the image. Then I'll select the paintbrush tool and the color white so I can paint out the inversion only in certain spots. And this will paint that extreme curve effect back in only over the stars that are overbright, having the effect of essentially shrinking and deconvolving those stars, making them fine and sharp again. This only affects the color dodge stars because I'm only painting on the color dodge star layer. In fact, not even on the layer, just on the curves tool, so it only affects how that curves tool affects the stars where I paint. And now, that bloating caused by the color dodge enhancement is removed. Color dodge is very useful for adding beautiful color and a lovely glow to the stars within an image, but it does tend to lead to bloats with brighter stars. However, that simple technique allows you to remove it very specifically wherever it occurs. The adjustments have led to some miscoloration around the edges of the image that's normal, and that's easy to take care of. I'll just crop it out. The final thing to do is adjust the color of the space. It's a little off color, kind of an odd purple, which is an artifact from compositing the low frequency layers together. To address this, I'll open a curves tool at the top of the low frequency layer, select the red channel, and draw it down just a little on the low side of the light curve. The effect is good, but a little strong and I don't want to apply it everywhere, so I'll invert that curves tool and only paint in its effect where I want it to appear in the image. And that's only in the darker regions of space. I don't want it to affect the nebulosity at all. Finally, there's what I think of as a little too much color spread within the image. The spread of the color needs to be restricted, and it's happening mostly in the blue range. So I'll open another levels tool, select the blue channel, and move the gamma slider just a little to the right, just until the space darkens and the color becomes a little tighter within the image. Then I'll open up yet another levels tool on top of that, and operating on the master channel, raise the white point to brighten the image just a bit. This will help bring out the molecular cloud structure, which lines the entire width and breadth of this dark nebula complex. And now, the image is done. We have NGC 654, a colorful open star cluster, right beside a mysterious black rift, like a bolt of lightning frozen in space. LDN 1337, the dark nebula, made visible not only by the light of the surrounding stars, but by applying high-frequency separation to tease out the paler fine cloud structure to be found all around and over the dark nebula. And if you look closely, you can see young stars over spires that have emerged from the nebula. Just imagine if we could peer within and see the hidden mechanics of star and planetary formation churning within. Unfortunately, YouTube's compression does awful things to videos and images, especially images and videos with a great deal of darkness in them. So to see a much better full-res version of the completed image, please take a moment to stop by the Sky Story Astrobin. The link is provided in the description. Do you have any thoughts, comments, or observations? Please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed and learned something from this episode, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It's always appreciated. Thank you for helping make this channel grow. I'm just so grateful for everybody's support. I'm still floored. I just started this channel a little over a year ago with nothing but a thought to share my passion for the stars, both the science and the photography of it. And the channel has just really turned into something very quickly. Thank you to everybody. Now, the meteorologist says that we are in for several clear nights and they are moonless nights, so I have ideal conditions coming up that I'm very excited about. So I'm going to go prep the observatory. It has a busy week ahead. And as for you, get out there and shoot that magnificent sky.